A retired police dog saved a woman from a mugger, but what the woman did next went viral. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The city streets bustled with the usual evening energy. Cars honking, people chatting, the rhythmic sound of footsteps against the concrete sidewalks. Among them, Emily Carter walked alone, clutching her purse a little tighter as she turned onto a quieter street. She wasn't normally nervous in her own neighborhood, but something about tonight felt off. She quickened her pace, her boots clicking a little louder than before. The dim glow of a flickering street lamp cast long shadows across the pavement. That's when she heard it. Footsteps. Close. Too close. Her breath hitched. She wasn't alone. Emily turned her head slightly, catching a glimpse of movement from the corner of her eye. A figure, tall, hooded, walking at a steady pace behind her. Her fingers gripped her bag tighter. Her heart pounded. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe it was just another pedestrian heading home. Then the figure sped up. Emily's stomach twisted. She knew this wasn't just paranoia anymore. She forced herself to stay calm, scanning the area. The street was nearly deserted. No open businesses, no cars slowing down. Just her, the stranger, and the sinking realization that she had nowhere to run. Then it happened. A hand grabbed her arm. Emily gasped, twisting instinctively, but the grip was strong. The mugger yanked her backward, his other hand reaching for her purse. "Let go!" She screamed, struggling against his grip. He didn't. If anything, he tightened his hold, his voice low and threatening. "Just give me the bag, lady. I don't want trouble." But trouble had already arrived. Out of the shadows, a blur of black and white fur shot forward like a missile. A dog. No, not just any dog. The mugger barely had time to react before a powerful force knocked him off balance. He stumbled back, releasing Emily in the process, his arms flailing as he tried to stay upright. But it was too late. The dog lunged, teeth bared, growling deep and low. It wasn't a wild attack, it was controlled, precise, trained. Emily stumbled backward, her breath coming in sharp gasps as she watched the scene unfold. The mugger hit the pavement hard, arms raised in a defensive posture. The dog had him pinned, paws pressing firmly against his chest, snarling just enough to warn. A flicker of panic flashed across the man's face. "What the hell? Get this thing off me!" Emily's mind was racing. She took in the dog's muscular build, the intelligence in its sharp brown eyes, the navy blue harness strapped to its chest. A police vest. No, not police. Retired. She had seen dogs like this before. K9s who had served their time on the force and were now living quieter lives. But this one was still a warrior. The mugger struggled, his hands trembling. Okay, I give up." The dog didn't move. Emily's voice was shaky, but she found it. "You should have thought of that before you grabbed me." A bystander had stopped at the corner, pulling out their phone. A second later, sirens wailed in the distance. The retired K9 had done his job. And as Emily locked eyes with the dog, something deep inside her told her, this wasn't just fate. This was the beginning of something much bigger. The sirens grew louder, cutting through the night air as red and blue lights reflected off the surrounding buildings. The retired K9 remained firmly planted on top of the mugger, his powerful frame unmoving, his sharp gaze locked onto the struggling man beneath him. Every time the suspect so much as twitched, the dog let out a low, unmistakable growl, a warning. Emily stood frozen, her pulse still racing. Just minutes ago, she had been fighting for control, certain she would lose her belongings, or worse. Now, because of this dog, she was safe. A police cruiser skidded to a stop nearby, and 2 officers rushed out, their eyes darting between Emily, the restrained mugger, and the unexpected K9 enforcer. One of the officers, a middle-aged man with a solid build and sharp eyes, reached for his radio. "We've got the suspect detained, but, looks like we've got an assisting officer we weren't expecting." The other officer, a younger woman with dark hair pulled into a tight bun, lowered her hand to her holster but hesitated when she saw the police harness strapped to the dog. She took a cautious step forward, her voice steady but careful. "Who's a good boy?" she murmured. The dog's ears flicked toward her, but he didn't budge. His job wasn't done yet. Emily finally found her voice. He saved me. This man tried to mug me and then he just appeared out of nowhere. Took him down like a pro." The officers exchanged glances. The male officer knelt beside the dog, speaking in a tone of authority, but with familiarity. "All right, buddy. You did good. Let us take it from here." For a brief moment, the dog hesitated. Then, with one last warning glance at the mugger, he stepped back, allowing the officers to move in. As soon as the suspect was cuffed, Emily let out the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The dog turned to face her now, his sharp brown eyes studying her carefully. Emily swallowed hard. "Hey there, boy? Or, officer?" The dog's tail gave a single, controlled wag, just once, as if acknowledging her but not committing to familiarity just yet. The female officer stepped closer, crouching down. "That harness? He's retired K9, isn't he?" The other officer nodded, running a hand down the dog's back, his voice turning almost reverent. "This is Duke." Emily blinked. You know him?" The officer nodded. "I remember him from the force, one of the best tracking and takedown dogs we had. Served 7 years before he was retired." But he frowned slightly, looking around. "I don't know where he's supposed to be now. He was adopted out after retirement. Usually, they stay with their handlers or go to carefully chosen families." Emily felt a twinge in her chest. "So Duke didn't have a home?" The officer continued, glancing at her. "Looks like you got lucky. Even retired, this guy still does the job." Emily looked down at Duke, whose eyes never left her face. There was something deeply intelligent in his gaze, something expectant. Her heart twisted. She had been saved by a dog who wasn't even supposed to be out here. A dog who should have been safe in a warm home instead of patrolling the streets alone. She knew in that moment what she had to do. Wherever he was supposed to go. "He's with me now." The officers looked at her, surprised. Even Duke tilted his head slightly. "You want to take him in?" the female officer asked. Emily knelt, holding out a hand. "If he'll have me." Duke stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he took a single step forward and pressed his nose into her palm. That was it. The decision was made. And neither of them would ever be alone again. The weight of Emily's decision settled over her. But instead of doubt, she felt something else, certainty. Duke wasn't just some stray dog who had wandered into her life. He had chosen her. The officers exchanged glances, surprised by her declaration. The male officer cleared his throat. "You understand what you're getting into, right? A retired K9 isn't like a regular dog. He's trained. He has instincts. He's used to a job." Emily nodded, her gaze never leaving Duke's. "I don't care how different he is. He saved me. The least I can do is give him a home." The female officer smiled slightly. Normally K9s are adopted by their handlers after retirement. If not, they're carefully placed with families who understand what it takes to care for them. She hesitated. It's rare for one to just end up on the streets. That thought sat uneasily in Emily's mind. Why was Duke out here alone? Who was supposed to be taking care of him? She reached out and gently ran a hand along his harness, fingers brushing over the faded letters that once read police. Duke didn't pull away. If anything, he leaned into her touch, just slightly. The male officer sighed. "All right, look, if you're serious about this, you'll need to fill out some paperwork. We'll have to check if anyone's reported him missing. But if no one claims him," he shrugged. "Then I guess he's yours." Emily's chest tightened. She had made up her mind the moment Duke saved her. But now, hearing it out loud, it felt real. Duke let out a slow, measured breath, as if sensing her emotions. She smiled. "Looks like we're in this together." The officers finished processing the mugger, loading him into the squad car. As they pulled away, Emily stood there with Duke by her side, a silent guardian. The city lights flickered around them, But for the first time, Emily didn't feel small or vulnerable walking home. Not with Duke beside her. That night, when they finally stepped into her apartment, she half expected Duke to be restless, to pace, to act like he was still on duty. Instead, he simply walked in, sniffed the air, then settled near the door. Guarding. Always guarding. Emily exhaled. "You don't have to watch over me, you know." Duke flicked an ear, but he didn't move. She chuckled. "Yeah, I didn't think that would work." She grabbed a blanket and laid it out beside him. "At least get comfortable, okay?" Duke eyed the blanket for a moment, then did something that caught Emily completely off guard. He sighed. A deep, bone-weary exhale, as if he hadn't felt safe enough to rest in a long time. Emily's chest ached. "You really have been on your own, haven't you?" Duke didn't answer, of course. But as he curled up on the blanket and finally closed his eyes, Emily knew she wasn't just adopting a dog. She was giving a soldier a place to call home, and she wasn't going to let him down. The next morning, sunlight streamed through Emily's window, casting a golden glow over the apartment. She blinked, stretching slightly, before remembering. She wasn't alone anymore. Her eyes flicked toward the door, where Duke lay curled up on the blanket she had given him the night before. He was completely still, except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. For the first time since she had met him, he looked at peace. Emily sat up quietly, not wanting to wake him just yet. She took a moment to really look at him. His muscular build, the scars hidden beneath his thick fur, the wear on his old police harness. This dog had seen things. He had been through battles, through missions, and yet now he had chosen to stay with her. It was humbling. As if sensing her gaze, Duke's ears twitched before his eyes opened. He stretched his long legs before shaking out his coat, standing up with a level of precision that made it clear. His training never left him. Emily smiled. "Good morning, officer." Duke let out a soft huff as if amused. She stood up, running a hand through her hair. "Okay, first things first. Breakfast. I don't know what you're used to eating, but I doubt you've had a proper meal in a while." Duke followed her into the kitchen, his paws barely making a sound against the floor. Emily rummaged through her cabinets, mentally kicking herself for not being dog owner ready. She had no kibble, no treats, just leftover takeout and cereal. Her stomach twisted. How long had he been living without a home, without guaranteed meals? She grabbed a pan, cracking a few eggs. "Scrambled eggs okay for you?" Duke sat near the counter, watching her closely. When she placed a plate on the floor, he stepped forward, sniffed it once, then ate in calculated, careful bites. There was no frantic devouring, no desperation. He was disciplined. Even in this, Emily sat on the floor beside him, watching him eat. You know, most dogs would have inhaled that. Duke finished, then licked his chops before settling beside her. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it was understanding. Then, a knock on the door. Duke's ears snapped up. His entire body went rigid, his muscles tensing. He moved instantly, placing himself between Emily and the door, his posture shifting from relaxed companion to trained protector. Emily's heart pounded. "Hey, it's okay, boy. Let me check." She stepped past him and opened the door. Nick, the officer from last night, stood there with a folder in his hands. His eyes flicked to Duke, who hadn't moved an inch. Nick whistled. "Wow, he's really made himself at home." "Huh." Emily nodded. "Yeah, he belongs here." Nick's expression turned serious. "I did some digging. Thought you'd want to know about Duke's past." Emily's stomach clenched. She glanced at Duke, who was still watching Nick like a hawk. "Go on." Nick handed her the folder. His former handler. That's where things get complicated. Emily hesitated before flipping open the file. The first thing she saw was a photo of Duke in uniform, standing beside a man in a police uniform. His handler, his partner. She swallowed. "Where is he now?" Nick's face darkened. "He's missing." Emily stared at the file, her fingers gripping the edges of the pages a little too tightly. The words blurred together for a moment before she forced herself to focus. Duke's former handler, Detective Ryan Calloway, had disappeared 6 months ago. No formal resignation, no transfer orders. Just gone. The official report listed him as missing, presumed dead, but there were inconsistencies. No body was ever found. No personal belongings left behind. His bank accounts remained untouched. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Nick exhaled. From what I gathered, Calloway was a damn good cop. Served over a decade on the force, 7 of those years with Duke. They were inseparable. The kind of team you read about in those feel-good stories. But one day, Calloway didn't show up for work. No goodbye. No explanations. Emily looked down at Duke, who sat rigid beside her, his ears flicking slightly. He waited for him, didn't he? She whispered. Nick nodded. Yeah. After Calloway disappeared, Duke refused to work with anyone else. They retired him early, figured it was best. He was put up for adoption, but whoever took him in didn't hold on to him for long. He probably ran off. Maybe looking for Calloway. Emily felt her throat tighten. Duke had been searching, looking for the only family he had ever known. And somehow, his search had led him to her. Nick crossed his arms. So here's the thing, Emily. If you want to keep him, no one's going to stop you. He's technically been without a legal owner for months. But I need to ask, are you sure about this? Emily met his gaze without hesitation. Yes. Nick studied her for a moment, then sighed. All right, but you should know there are rumors. Some officers think Calloway didn't just disappear. They think he was getting too close to something. And someone didn't like it. A chill ran down Emily's spine. What was he investigating? Nick glanced at Duke. That's the million-dollar question. Silence stretched between them before Nick straightened. Look, I'll keep digging. Maybe we can find out what really happened to Calloway. But in the meantime, he gestured toward Duke. Take care of him. He's been through enough. Emily nodded. I will. Nick gave Duke one last look before turning to leave. You ever need backup? You know where to find me. As the door clicked shut, Emily looked down at Duke. He was still staring at the file, as if he understood every word. She knelt beside him, running a hand down his back. I think you and I have some work to do. Duke didn't move for a moment. Then, he let out a slow, deliberate exhale and nudged the file with his nose. He was ready, and so was she. The weight of what she had just learned pressed against Emily's chest. But instead of fear, she felt something stronger, determination. Duke had been searching for his handler, and now, she was determined to help him find out the truth. She glanced down at the file Nick had given her. The pages were filled with police reports, last known locations, and scattered notes from the investigation. But nothing concrete. No leads that had ever turned up anything useful. Duke, however, seemed fixated on one particular page. Emily frowned, leaning in. The page detailed Calloway's last known assignment, an undercover operation tied to an organized crime syndicate operating in the city. The notes were vague, mostly redacted, but a few key details stood out. A name, Victor Salgado. Emily whispered it under her breath. Who are you? Duke let out a low, quiet huff, as if urging her forward. She turned to her laptop, typing the name into a search engine. A flood of articles popped up: racketeering, money laundering, suspected drug trafficking. Salgado was no small-time criminal. He was a ghost in the system. A man who had been investigated multiple times but had never been convicted. Her stomach twisted. Was this who Calloway had been investigating before he disappeared? She clicked on one of the articles, skimming through the details. Salgado was known to operate out of several fronts: high-end clubs, car dealerships, even a chain of boxing gyms. If Calloway had been undercover, he might have been trying to get close to one of those businesses. Emily took a deep breath and closed her laptop. We need more information. Duke's ears twitched, as if he understood. She grabbed her keys and stood. Come on, partner. Let's go find some answers. The moment they stepped outside, Duke's posture shifted. His head lifted, eyes sharp, scanning the street instinctively. Even retired, he was always on duty. Emily led him toward her car, and as they pulled onto the road, her mind raced. She needed to start somewhere. Nick had said Calloway went missing 6 months ago. If she could retrace his steps, maybe she could find something the police had missed. The first stop? One of Salgado's businesses. She gripped the wheel tighter. "You up for this, Duke?" Duke let out a single, short bark. Emily smirked. "Yeah, me too." The city lights blurred past them, the weight of the mystery growing heavier. But one thing was certain, they were about to uncover something big. Emily's heart pounded as she parked a few blocks away from Salgado's boxing gym. The place wasn't flashy, but that made sense. Salgado operated in shadows, not spotlights. If Calloway had been investigating him, this could have been one of the last places he was seen. She turned to Duke, who was already sitting upright in the passenger seat. His eyes locked on the building. Even from inside the car, he sensed something. His muscles were taut, ears alert. Emily exhaled. "All right, partner. We go in, we ask some questions, and we get out. No trouble unless it finds us first." Duke blinked, but his posture didn't relax. They stepped out of the car, the cool night air wrapping around them. The gym's neon opened sign flickered against the darkened street. Emily pulled her hoodie tighter around her, doing her best to look like someone who belonged. Inside, the smell of sweat, leather, and old linoleum filled the air. Heavy bags swung from chains, and a few fighters moved around the ring, sparring under the watchful eyes of a trainer. The receptionist barely glanced at her as she approached the counter. "Can I help you?" the man behind the desk asked, his voice flat. Emily forced a small smile. "Yeah, I'm looking for someone who used to come here. Name's Calloway." The receptionist's fingers stopped tapping the keyboard. His eyes flicked toward her, suspicious. "Never heard of him." Duke stiffened beside her. His nostrils flared slightly as he took in the room, his head turning just a fraction toward the back hallway. Emily didn't believe the guy for a second. "Really? Because I heard he was here a lot before he disappeared. Seems like something you'd remember." The receptionist's jaw tensed. "Look, lady, I don't know what you're fishing for, but we don't give out information on customers. Maybe you should leave." Emily didn't get a chance to reply. Duke's ears flicked sharply, his gaze locking onto a man stepping out of the back hallway. The moment Duke saw him, his entire body snapped to attention. A deep, low growl rumbled from his chest. Emily turned just as the man froze mid-step. His eyes widened, not in confusion, but in recognition. The realization hit Emily like a truck. Duke knew him, and worse, he knew Duke. The gym fell silent as Duke took a slow step forward, his body tense. Waiting, watching. The man swallowed hard, then took a step back, muttering something under his breath before quickly retreating through the back door. Emily's pulse skyrocketed. "Duke, do you know him?" Duke didn't react to her words. His focus was locked on the door. His instincts, his training, everything was telling him to chase. Emily made a split-second decision. "Let's go." Duke bolted. Emily sprinted after him, pushing past the stunned receptionist, her heart hammering. The moment they hit the alleyway behind the gym, she caught sight of the man running. He was fast, but Duke was faster. The chase was on. Emily's lungs burned as she sprinted after Duke, the sharp chill of the night air cutting through her with every step. The alley was narrow, lined with dumpsters and crates, but none of that slowed Duke down. He was locked in, focused. The man ahead of them was fast, but Duke was faster. His paws barely touched the ground as he surged forward, closing the distance with terrifying efficiency. Emily pushed harder. "Duke, don't lose him." The man rounded a corner, shoving over a stack of crates to slow them down. Duke barely hesitated. He leapt over them with ease, his powerful muscles launching him forward. Emily, not nearly as graceful, crashed into one of the crates before recovering. By the time she turned the corner, she saw Duke lunge. A snarl ripped through the alley. The man screamed. Duke tackled him hard, sending both of them crashing onto the pavement. The man twisted, trying to throw him off, but Duke was trained for this. He pinned the suspect with his massive paws, his growl low and warning. Emily skidded to a stop, breathless. "Stay down," she snapped. The man didn't dare move. His eyes flicked between Duke's snarling teeth and Emily's glare. She stepped closer, her heart still pounding. "You knew him, didn't you?" The man didn't answer. Emily crouched beside him. "Don't play dumb. I saw your face when you saw Duke. You recognized him." The man swallowed hard. His fingers twitched against the pavement, but he didn't try to move. Not with Duke's weight pressing him down. Emily's voice dropped lower. "Where is Calloway?" The man licked his lips, glancing around as if weighing his options. Then, finally, he muttered, "I don't know." Duke growled, pressing down harder. The man yelped. Okay, he gasped. "I swear, I don't know exactly where he is, but I know what happened to him." Emily felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "Start talking." The man hesitated, then exhaled sharply. Calloway was getting too close. Salgado's people knew it. They wanted him gone. But they didn't kill him. Emily's heart nearly stopped. "What do you mean?" The man's voice wavered. They took him, made it look like he vanished. But he's alive." Emily's breath caught. Duke's ears flicked slightly, his gaze narrowing. Calloway was alive. The man swallowed. "But if you're smart, you'll stop looking. Because if you don't, they'll make sure you disappear too." Emily didn't hesitate. "Where are they keeping him?" The man's expression twisted. "I don't know exactly, but I heard rumors. An abandoned warehouse. Somewhere near the docks." Emily's mind raced. If that was true, then Calloway had been held captive for 6 months. Duke let out a low growl, his brown eyes burning into the man beneath him. Emily stood, gripping the suspect's collar. "If you're lying to me, I'll let him finish what he started." The man swallowed hard. "I swear, that's all I know." Emily stepped back. Duke released his hold, but he didn't look away. The man scrambled to his feet, hands raised. Emily fixed him with a sharp glare. "Get lost." He didn't need to be told twice. He bolted down the alley, disappearing into the darkness. Silence settled. Emily turned to Duke, her pulse still racing. She ran a hand over his fur, grounding herself. "He's alive, Duke." Duke exhaled, his body still tense, his mind still in work mode. Emily straightened. "We're going to the docks." Duke gave a sharp, decisive bark. And just like that, the real hunt began. The drive to the docks felt both endless and far too short. Emily's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white with tension. Every detail of the conversation with the man at the gym replayed in her mind, over and over. Calloway was alive. That fact alone sent a wave of urgency through her veins. If he had been missing for 6 months, held by Salgado's people, there was no telling what kind of condition he was in. And if they had kept him alive this long, it meant one of two things. They needed him for something, or they were waiting for the right time to get rid of him. Duke sat stiffly in the passenger seat, his head high, his sharp gaze scanning the passing streets as if he knew exactly what was happening. He wasn't just a passenger in this mission, he was leading it. Emily turned onto a narrow road leading toward the docks. The farther she drove, the more desolate the surroundings became. Fewer lights, fewer people, more shadows. By the time she parked behind an abandoned lot, the hairs on her arms stood on end. Duke let out a slow, deliberate huff, his nose twitching. Emily turned off the engine and looked at him. "You smell something?" Duke's ears perked. He was already on high alert. Emily took a deep breath, slipping a flashlight into her pocket and tucking a small pocket knife into her jacket. Not much, but better than nothing. She opened the door quietly, and Duke jumped down without hesitation. His paws barely made a sound against the damp pavement. The docks stretched out ahead of them, a maze of shipping containers, rusted warehouses, and towering cranes. Somewhere in this mess, Calloway was being held. Duke suddenly stilled, his body tensed, ears twitching. His nostrils flared, taking in the air. Then, without warning, he took off. Emily barely had time to react before she was running after him. Duke moved like a missile, weaving between containers with terrifying precision. He was locked in, chasing something only he could sense. Emily's pulse hammered. "Duke, wait!" But he didn't stop. And then a voice, faint, weak, coming from one of the warehouses. Emily skidded to a halt, her breath catching. She could barely hear it, but it was there. A ragged, hoarse sound. A man's voice. Duke let out a sharp bark, turning toward the noise. Emily's chest tightened. It was Calloway. She sprinted forward, following Duke as he darted toward a rusted metal door. The building was old, covered in graffiti, windows shattered from years of abandonment. But someone was inside. Emily pressed her ear to the door. Muffled voices, a shuffle of movement, then a cough. Emily's stomach dropped. She grabbed the handle and slowly turned it. Locked. She cursed under her breath. No way in unless... She turned to Duke, who was already scanning the perimeter. He sniffed the ground, then abruptly took off toward the side of the building. Emily followed, her heart racing. Duke stopped at a broken window, just big enough to squeeze through. Emily looked at him. "You want me to climb through there, don't you?" Duke gave a single wag of his tail. Emily let out a breath. "All right, let's do this." She pulled herself up, maneuvering through the broken frame, careful not to make too much noise. Duke, despite his size, managed to leap up with an impressive show of agility. Inside, the air was damp, thick with the scent of oil, metal, and sweat. They moved carefully, creeping between old crates and rusted machinery. The faint sound of voices drifted from a room ahead. Emily clenched her fists. They were close, and there was no turning back now. Emily pressed her back against the cold metal wall, heart hammering as she strained to hear the voices ahead. The dim light from a flickering bulb barely illuminated the warehouse, casting long, shifting shadows across the cracked concrete floor. Duke stood at her side, his body low and tense, his eyes locked on the slightly ajar door leading to the next room. He was waiting for her command. She swallowed hard. This was it. A voice rang out, low, irritated. "I told you, he's no use to us anymore. Salgado wants him gone." Another voice, calmer but no less menacing. "You sure about that? He's been in here for months. Could have heard things we don't want getting out." Emily clenched her fists. Calloway was still alive, but for how much longer? Duke let out a barely audible growl, sensing the tension rolling off her. She placed a hand on his back, grounding herself. She had to be smart. Rushing in was suicide. She scanned the warehouse, searching for an advantage. Then she saw it, an old control panel near the far wall. Rusted, but still intact. If she could trip the power, even for a moment, she might be able to create enough chaos to get Calloway out. Emily leaned down, whispering into Duke's ear. "Stay here. Wait for my signal." Duke gave a slow blink. Understood. She moved swiftly, staying low as she crept toward the panel. The men in the next room kept talking, oblivious to the silent hunt closing in around them. Her fingers found the main switch. She took a deep breath. One chance. She yanked it down. The warehouse plunged into darkness. Shouts erupted. "What the hell?" Emily didn't hesitate. She bolted toward the room, shoving the door open just as one of the men stumbled in confusion. Duke lunged. A deep, guttural snarl ripped through the air as Duke crashed into the nearest thug, knocking him to the ground before he even knew what hit him. The second man barely had time to react before Emily grabbed a rusted metal pipe from the floor and swung. The impact sent the man crashing into a stack of crates. Emily barely registered the sound. She was already moving. There, in the corner of the dimly lit room, slumped against a chair, was Calloway. His hands were bound, his face bruised, but his eyes were sharp and awake. Emily rushed forward, dropping to her knees. "Calloway?" His gaze flickered, recognition dawning. "Who?" He coughed, his voice hoarse. "Who the hell are you?" She gritted her teeth, working at his restraints. "I'll explain later. We're getting you out of here." Duke stood guard, growling at the down thugs. One of them groaned, trying to push himself up. Duke let out a sharp bark, baring his teeth. The man didn't try again. Calloway, still weak, exhaled shakily. "Duke." His eyes locked onto the dog, something flickering across his face. Shock, relief, disbelief. "You found me, boy?" Duke let out a soft whine, stepping closer, his ears flicking. Even in the chaos, Emily could feel the weight of the moment. Duke had never stopped looking for his handler. And now, after 6 long months, he had found him. But they weren't safe yet. Footsteps pounded outside the warehouse. More men. They had to move. Now, Emily ripped the last of Calloway's bindings free and hauled him to his feet. "Come on, we have to go." Calloway swayed slightly, his strength barely holding, but his eyes were clear. He gave Duke a weak smile. "Still saving my ass, huh?" Duke let out a short huff as if to say, "Of course." Emily gritted her teeth. "Move! Now!" With Duke leading the way, they sprinted for the exit, but the fight wasn't over yet. The pounding of boots echoed through the warehouse as more men rushed toward them. They had seconds, maybe less. Emily tightened her grip on Calloway's arm, supporting him as they moved. He was weak but still managing to stay on his feet. Duke, however, was at full capacity. His head snapped toward the approaching footsteps, his ears standing tall. A low, guttural growl rumbled from his chest. A warning. Emily scanned the warehouse they were boxed in. The only real exit was the way they came, but that was no longer an option. She cursed under her breath. "We need another way out." Calloway took a shaky breath. There's a side exit. Back through the loading bay. Emily didn't hesitate. "Duke, cover us." The retired K-9 didn't need to be told twice. The first man burst through the doorway, his weapon raised, but before he could even aim, Duke launched. A sharp snarl ripped through the air as Duke's massive frame collided with the thug, knocking him back into the wall. The man screamed, flailing as Duke held him down, teeth bared. Emily and Calloway didn't stop to watch. They tore through the warehouse, weaving between crates and rusted machinery. The air was thick with dust and the faint stench of old oil. Behind them, Duke disengaged and bolted after them, leaving the incapacitated man groaning on the ground. More shouts rang out. They were being hunted. Calloway gritted his teeth. There, on the left. Emily spotted it. A rusted metal door, slightly ajar. She sprinted toward it, shoving it open with her shoulder. The night air hit them like a slap. They were outside. The loading bay stretched out in front of them. A series of trucks and shipping containers scattered across the asphalt. In the distance, the dark waters of the docks glistened under the streetlights. But there was no time to celebrate. The sound of tires screeching sent a jolt of panic through Emily's chest. A black SUV swung into the lot, its headlights flashing toward them. Emily grabbed Calloway. "Move!" Duke stayed in front, his body tense, his tail rigid. His instincts were screaming. More men were coming. The SUV's doors flung open, and 2 more men spilled out, guns drawn. Emily ducked behind a stack of crates, pulling Calloway with her. Duke pressed in beside them, his chest heaving, eyes flicking between the threats. Calloway let out a bitter chuckle. "Didn't think I'd go out like this." Emily glared at him. "We're not dead yet," Calloway sighed, glancing at Duke. "You always did have a way of finding trouble, boy." Duke didn't move. He was waiting, calculating. Emily clenched her fists. They were outnumbered, outgunned. But Duke was never outmatched. Emily exhaled, her mind racing. She needed a plan, fast. Then a sound. More sirens. Her heart leapt. Calloway blinked. "You called backup?" Emily smirked. "Not exactly." Nick's squad car came roaring into the lot, tires screeching. The tables had just turned. The SUV's headlights cut through the dark lot, illuminating Emily, Calloway, and Duke in harsh white light. The men who had stepped out barely had time to react before Nick's squad car screeched to a stop, sirens blaring. "Drop your weapons." Nick's voice boomed over the commotion. The 2 men hesitated. They had the numbers, but now, with police backup, their advantage was slipping. Fast. Duke stood his ground, muscles coiled. He let out a low, threatening growl. One that said, "Make a move, I dare you." Emily pressed a hand against Calloway's arm. "Stay down." Calloway smirked weakly. Wasn't planning on running. One of the men raised his gun. Duke lunged. Everything happened in a blur. The gun went off. a sharp crack that echoed across the docks. But Duke was already moving. He crashed into the man, his weight slamming him to the pavement. The gun skidded across the asphalt. The man screamed, flailing as Duke's powerful jaws locked around his forearm. The second thug panicked, turning to run. Nick was faster. A single well-placed tackle sent the man sprawling. Within seconds, Nick had him cuffed and face down on the ground. Duke held his target in place, snarling until Emily gave the command. Duke, release. With trained precision, Duke let go and backed off, standing over the downed man like a shadow of judgment. Emily exhaled, heart racing. You good, Calloway? Calloway coughed, wiping blood from his lip. I've been better, but yeah, alive, thanks to you. Nick stood, yanking the suspect onto his feet. I don't know what you guys just got yourselves into, but Salgado's going to know we hit one of his warehouses. Emily nodded, already thinking ahead. Then we hit him back. Nick raised a brow. You're serious? She glanced down at Duke. The dog had chosen her, led her straight to this mystery, to Calloway. This wasn't over. She looked up, her expression unwavering. We finish what Calloway started. Calloway chuckled weakly. You might just be crazier than I am. Emily smirked. Guess you'll have to stick around and find out. Duke let out a small huff as if agreeing. And just like that, the real fight had only begun.